All right, let's dive into some heavy stuff today. We're going to explore the life of, well, Adolf Hitler. And before anyone thinks we're glorifying a dictator, let me be clear, that's not what we're about at all. It's more about, like, trying to understand how someone goes from being, a struggling artist to, well, one of the most infamous figures in history. Right?
And that's exactly what makes this deep dive so fascinating, tracing that path, understanding the choices he made, and the context that led to such devastating consequences. So going back to the very beginning, a small town in Austria, 1889, young Adolf Hitler is born.
So we've got this seemingly ordinary kid, loves to draw, dreams big, but things weren't exactly peaceful at home. What was the family dynamic like?
Well, his father, Alois, was, I guess you could say, a strict disciplinarian, wanted Adolf to follow a traditional path, a stable government job, something practical. But Adolf, he was drawn to art, a passion that his mother, Clara, really nurtured. Sadly, her support couldn't fully shield him from his father's disapproval. You can imagine those early clashes created a sense of frustration, maybe even resentment in the young Hitler.
Yeah, it's like that classic story, the artist clashing with the pragmatic parent. And then when Adolf's only 13, his father dies, you'd think that would free him up to pursue his art. But it seems like it had the opposite effect.
Right. Instead of liberation, there was this kind of withdrawal, a loss of interest in school, and then a deepening sense of loss. When his mother, his biggest advocate, also passes away a few years later, and suddenly he's alone, facing a world that feels increasingly hostile.
So he's in Vienna, trying to make it as an artist, gets rejected not once, but twice from the Academy of Fine Arts. That's got to be a blow, especially after everything else he's been through.
Absolutely, and that's where the seeds of resentment start to really, really take root. Living in poverty, selling postcards just to survive, surrounded by a society that seemingly rejected him. It's a breeding ground for anger, for blame, for looking for someone or something to hold responsible for his misfortune.
And then World War I breaks out. For Hitler, this wasn't just a global conflict. It was, I don't know, like a personal escape almost, a chance to find some purpose, maybe even a sense of belonging in all the chaos.
He becomes a soldier, throws himself into the fight, earns medals for bravery. It's like he finally found a sense of identity, of camaraderie, something that had been missing in his life. But then comes the crushing defeat of Germany, and his world is shattered again.
It's like having the rug pulled out from under you. He takes Germany's loss so personally. He sees the post-war turmoil not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. And that's where his journey into, I guess you could say, the dark side of politics really begins, right?
Yes, he joins this small political group, the German Workers' Party, and quickly discovers he's got this knack for public speaking. He's able to tap into the anger and frustration of everyday Germans, promising them a return to greatness, a restoration of national pride.
Okay, so he's got this platform, this audience, receptive to his message, but how does he go from a member of this fringe group to the leader of the Nazi Party? What's the turning point there?
Well, he's strategic, right? He understands the power of symbols, branding. He renames the party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party for short, of course, and designs the now infamous swastika symbol. His message becomes more extreme, more focused. He starts pointing fingers, blaming specific groups, particularly Jews and communists, for Germany's problems.
It's frightening how he twists this narrative, preys on people's fears and prejudices, but people bought into it.
Unfortunately, yes. Remember, this is a Germany reeling from defeat, crippled by hyperinflation, unemployment, social unrest, I mean. People were desperate for answers, for someone to blame. And Hitler offered them a scapegoat, a simple solution, and a vision of a glorious future.
So it wasn't just charisma, it was the context, too. The conditions were right for someone like Hitler to exploit.
Exactly. And he didn't just rely on speeches. He understood the power of propaganda, controlling the narrative. Rallies, posters, a carefully crafted image. I mean, he used every tool at his disposal to shape public perception.
It's a calculated climb to power. Then we have the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. A failed attempt to overthrow the government. It lands him in prison. But ironically, it only seems to strengthen his position.
That's because he uses his time in prison to write Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. This book becomes his manifesto, laying out his ideology, his hatred, his vision for an Aryan master race. It becomes a bestseller, solidifying his status as the leader of the Nazi movement.
It's almost unbelievable how a failed coup and a prison sentence actually boosted his notoriety.
But it's important to remember, the world was also in the throes of the Great Depression at that time. Germany was hit especially hard. People were desperate for solutions, for a leader who could offer hope. And that's where Hitler's promises of economic recovery and national revival really resonated.
So by 1933, he's appointed Chancellor of Germany. This marks a pivotal moment, not just for Germany, but for the world. What was the immediate impact of his rise to power?
Initially, there were some positive changes. He implemented public works programs, boosted industry, reduced unemployment. People started to believe he was the savior he claimed to be. But this early success masked a much darker reality.
We're talking about the consolidation of power, the suppression of dissent, the creation of the SS and the Hitler Youth. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Exactly. He systematically dismantled democratic institutions, silenced any opposition, and used fear and violence to enforce conformity. The Germany we knew was gone, replaced by a totalitarian state under his absolute control.
And this is just the beginning. We'll delve into the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust in the next part of our deep dive. It's a chilling reminder of where unchecked ambition and hatred can lead.
Welcome back. So as we left off, Hitler had transformed Germany into this totalitarian regime, but his ambitions, they went far beyond Germany's borders. He envisioned this vast empire, a testament to what he believed was the superiority of the Aryan race.
So how does someone go from, leading a country to wanting to conquer a continent? What fueled that level of ambition?
Well, it's a complex mix of factors, but his ideology was central to it all. He believed in this concept of Lebensraum, which essentially meant living space. He argued that the German people, they needed more territory to thrive, to fulfill their destiny as this master race. And he saw war as a natural, even necessary way to achieve this.
Lebensraum. It's a chilling word when you consider the implications. He's basically justifying expansion and conquest based on this twisted notion of racial superiority.
Exactly. And he specifically targeted Eastern Europe, viewing those nations as inferior and ripe for German domination. It's a worldview completely warped by his ideology.
It's like he's living in a different reality, one shaped by his own twisted beliefs.
Yeah.
And this leads us to 1939 and the invasion of Poland, the event that ignites World War II.
The invasion of Poland was a calculated gamble. Hitler had been steadily expanding German territory through a combination of diplomacy and military threats. I mean, he annexed Austria, took over Czechoslovakia, all without really firing a shot. But invading Poland, that crossed a red line. Britain and France had pledged to defend Poland's sovereignty, and they declared war on Germany.
And just like that, the world is plunged into another global conflict, even more devastating than the first. What was the initial reaction? Was there a sense of shock, or was it more of a
Resigned inevitability? I think it was a mix of both, really. There was definitely shock at the speed and aggression of the German invasion, but there was also this sense that war had been brewing for some time. The tensions, the appeasement policies of the previous years, it all kind of pointed towards a confrontation.
And the early years of the war saw stunning German victories. His blitzkrieg tactics, these lightning-fast coordinated attacks, completely overwhelmed his opponents. France fell in just 6 weeks, and much of Europe was under Nazi control. What made this approach so effective?
Blitzkrieg, which literally means lightning war. It combined tanks, aircraft, and infantry in a highly mobile and aggressive offensive. It was a shock tactic, really, designed to overwhelm the enemy before they could even mount a defense. And it worked brilliantly, at least initially. It played on the element of surprise and the sheer speed and force of the attacks.
It must have been a terrifying experience for those facing this onslaught, a sense of helplessness, of not knowing where the next blow would come from.
Absolutely. It was a period of immense fear and uncertainty. Occupied countries faced brutal repression. Resistance movements sprung up. Millions were displaced from their homes. And amidst all this chaos and suffering, something even more horrific was unfolding: the Holocaust.
This is where we see the true depths of Hitler's depravity. The systematic persecution and murder of millions of Jews and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. It's a stain on humanity, a testament to the horrors that can arise from unchecked hatred and prejudice.
We have to confront this reality head-on. Hitler's ideology, fueled by anti-Semitism and racial hatred, led to the creation of concentration camps, where people were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The scale of the genocide is almost incomprehensible, a systematic attempt to wipe out entire populations.
It's hard to fathom how such barbarity could occur on such a massive scale. Were there any voices of dissent, any attempts to stop it?
There were individuals and groups who risked their lives to resist the Nazi regime. Some hid refugees, some forged documents, some sabotaged Nazi operations. These stories of courage and compassion offer a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness.
It's important to remember those acts of resistance, to acknowledge that even in the face of such evil, there were those who fought back, who refused to be complicit. But the war raged on, and eventually the tide began to turn against Germany. What factors led to their defeat?
Well, several key factors contributed to Germany's downfall. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. The sheer vastness of the country, the harsh winter conditions, and the fierce resistance of the Soviet people all drained German resources and manpower.
And then, of course, there's the entry of the United States into the war in 1941.
That was a pivotal turning point. The industrial might of the United States, combined with the growing strength of the Allied forces, put immense pressure on Germany. By 1944, with Allied forces advancing from both east and west, it was clear that defeat was inevitable.
So, as the war closes in on Germany, what happens to Hitler? What becomes of this man who once held such sway over millions?
As Allied forces closed in, Hitler retreated to his bunker in Berlin. He became increasingly isolated, detached from reality, clinging to this delusion that Germany could still achieve victory.
It's a stark contrast to the image of the charismatic leader who had once captivated the nation. The reality of defeat, of his own impending downfall, must have been crushing.
In April 1945, as Soviet troops surrounded Berlin, Hitler married his longtime companion, Eva Braun. Shortly after, they both committed suicide, choosing death over surrender.
A final act of defiance, perhaps, but one that could never erase the devastation he unleashed upon the world. What did the discovery of his body signify for the world?
The discovery of Hitler's body marked the end of an era, a period of unprecedented violence and destruction. It was a symbolic closure, really, a confirmation that the Nazi regime had finally fallen.
But the world was left to grapple with the scars of his actions, to rebuild from the ashes of war. His legacy is a complex one, filled with darkness and destruction, but also with lessons that we must never forget. Man, this deep dive has been, well, intense. We went from Hitler's early life to, the fall of the Nazi regime and his death. It's a story that's both fascinating and horrifying. It really leaves you with a lot to think about.
I think that's the power of studying history. It's not just, memorizing dates and battles. It's about understanding the forces at play, the choices people make, individuals, and the ripple effects that can last, well, generations.
So let's talk about those ripple effects. What are the key takeaways from, Hitler's life and the rise of Nazism? What lessons can we apply to our own lives and the world today?
One of the most crucial lessons is the danger of unchecked ambition and the corrosive power of hatred. Hitler was driven by this lust for power and a belief in his own superiority. He manipulated people's fears and their prejudices, turning them against each other for his own gain.
It's a reminder that leaders who appeal to our basest instincts, who divide rather than unite, they can pose a serious threat to democracy and human rights. We see this happening even today, don't we?
Absolutely. We need to be, vigilant in recognizing and rejecting those who seek power through fear, scapegoating, and the suppression of dissent. It's about being aware of the tactics they use to manipulate public opinion and being critical of the information we consume.
Which brings us to another takeaway, the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. Hitler was a master propagandist. He controlled the narrative, used sophisticated techniques to, shape public perception and demonize his opponents.
In today's world, where information is so readily available, not always accurate or reliable, it's more important than ever to be, I guess. Discerning consumers of news and media, question sources, consider different perspectives, be wary of those trying to manipulate our emotions.
It's not just about being informed, it's about being engaged citizens, actively seeking out, diverse viewpoints and challenging our own biases. And finally, I think Hitler's story really highlights the importance of compassion, empathy, and understanding. The Holocaust is a stark reminder of what can happen when hatred and intolerance are allowed to, run rampant.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we each have a responsibility to stand up against injustice, to defend the vulnerable, and to promote a world where diversity is celebrated, not demonized.
This deep dive has been a sobering reminder of the fragility of democracy, the seductive nature of power, and the enduring consequences of hatred. But it's also a story of resilience, of countless acts of courage and compassion that, emerged from the darkness.
And ultimately, it's a story about choices. The choices individuals make, the choices societies make, they all have consequences. We have the power to shape the future, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to create a world where the horrors of the Holocaust are never repeated.
That's a powerful message to end on. This deep dive into the life of Adolf Hitler has been a journey through some of the darkest chapters of human history. But it's also a reminder that we have the power to choose a different path, to build a future based on compassion, understanding, and respect for all. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's challenged you to think critically about the world around you and to, use your own voice to make a positive difference.